Hi, welcome to the TeenPact Elected Officials podcast. Today we have on our next guest, Mr. Tim Echols.
Tim Echols founded TeenPact in 1993 at the Georgia State Capitol. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Tim Echols.
Hey guys, thanks a lot for having me on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming, Mr. Echols. We really appreciate you spending your time to come talk to us. Kind of just to start and introduce this episode, could you tell us a little bit about your background and who you are?
You know, I grew up as a student leader. I went to public high school, became president of my high school, worked with kids from all over our state, and really had a desire to help people become effective leaders. And it was after we started TeenPact that we began to really do this on an accelerated basis, working with mostly the homeschooling community, bringing students to the Georgia Capitol, and of course, then to South Carolina, Kentucky, and it took a while, but TeenPact is now in every state in the nation.
Yeah, that's awesome. So kind of just to get started with the main audience that is going to listen to this is TeenPacters. So could you tell us a little bit about the idea of TeenPact and why you started it and how you came up with it?
You know, I really wanted to do something that would be fun, that students would come, they would learn parliamentary procedure, they would meet the key players at the Capitol, and that's always, of course, legislators, the executive branch, the judicial branch, though they're often out of sight, but lobbyists and journalists. Those are very important figures in public policy. They have great influence, and the only way to actually meet those people is to do a program during the legislative session. So it would be less crowded to go to the Capitol in the summer, probably, in most places, but most capitals are just a museum in the summer. By doing TeenPact during the legislative session, we're taking our students into the heart of state government and giving them a really real-time look at how things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of looking at TeenPact every year, every couple of years, I kind of add onto the program to make it a little bit different. Now, I'm wondering what TeenPact looked like kind of the first couple of years that it was around. So if you had to think of some major differences between TeenPact now and TeenPact back then, what do you think those would be?
Well, TeenPact started on Sunday back then, Sunday afternoon, and went all the way through Friday. There was no one-day class for kids 8 to 12. So if you signed up for TeenPact in the early days, you got a big 3-ring binder full of work that you had to do. It was mailed to you. The homework load was about 10 times what it is now. And we began with a scavenger hunt at the Capitol when it was empty on that Sunday before class started. And then it was all day Monday instead of half a day, and then all the way to Friday. So if you think about the 2 additional programming hours on Sunday, the additional 4 on Monday is 6, and the 8 on Friday, that's an additional 14 hours of program that you would have gone through in the early years.
That's awesome. One of the things I was reading in kind of preparation for this episode was this story on TeenPact's website. One of the things that really interested me was that the first TeenPact class ever was 18 students meeting. And I was curious, now that TeenPact has grown to literally hundreds and even thousands of students, how you think, did you ever think it would get this big? Was this your vision all along? Or when you kind of first started TeenPact, what was your vision for this ministry?
You know, we really only saw TeenPact as a Georgia program that very first year. We actually thought we were going to do chapters all over the state where a TeenPact chapter would be meeting on a weekly basis in various cities, and then you would come to the state capitol once a year. But after we did that first TeenPact, we thought, hey, this might actually be something that could work in another state. So we had limited bandwidth on what we could do. TeenPact wasn't even a nonprofit corporation at the time. It was really just an idea, just a program that I was doing almost like a pilot program. And so we had to decide, was this going to be just a Georgia program that covered the whole state, or would this just be something that would happen once a year in Georgia and then once a year in South Carolina? And so we decided that we were going to go with a national model instead of a state model. And that's when we decided that we would go to South Carolina that next year. So right after the first Georgia class, I took some of the staff, after the first Georgia year, I should say. We had 3 classes that first year in 1994. I took 3 of the, quote, staff that we had, and we did a vision trip to South Carolina, kind of scouted out the state capital, where we might keep students, where we would keep the staff, how the program would work there, where their bill room was, where their Speaker of the House room was. So it was kind of a vision trip, and the very first South Carolina class was staffed by Georgia TeenPackers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. I think it's really interesting how different the ministry is today from how it was back then. Seeing how it's kind of grown from this small class that teaches students about the government to kind of a large national scale organization. Now, if you had to look back to those first couple of years, what do you think was the defining moment that you kind of thought, well, wow, this really could be a national organization that could get really big? Or was there a defining moment similar to that?
I think after we had that first class in South Carolina and we were successful in going into another state, working with a whole new set of parents that didn't really know us, and that we had the same results in South Carolina that we did in Georgia, the same kind of positive evaluations from students, the same, crop of staff that came out of that first group of kids in South Carolina, where we knew that the program could be sustainable, that there was a way to actually pull leadership out of being in a state just 1 year. And so after we saw it duplicated the first time, then we realized, okay, if it can be duplicated in South Carolina, it can be duplicated anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the things, and even looking at different organizations today, what makes TeenPact, among many things, really unique and special is their use and their belief in young leadership. I think that's what really makes TeenPact special, is you go to these classes and sometimes they're as young as 15-year-old staffers staffing these classes. And I really was curious why you thought of that idea, and why you believe so much in the ability of young people to lead in an ever-evolving culture that says, you really can't do much, or you really shouldn't do much until you're older to lead.
I got that idea to use student staff from the student council camps that I went to as a high school student, and then eventually I was a junior counselor at these student council camps. And in fact, we called the first TeenPact staff JCs, or junior counselors. It wasn't until the second year that we changed that terminology to interns and staff. And we had that one intern, that next year there was only one. And then, obviously it grew from there. But I had seen this work in my own life as a student, and I knew that students could motivate each other better than adults could. And so I modeled the staff idea on what I had seen in state student council camp, and then obviously TeenPact has its own flavor, its own distinctives, its own training, but the general principle is the same, that a young leader can motivate their peers better than an adult usually.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, staying on this topic a bit of just young leadership, what advice would you give to someone who goes to TeenPact, who sees the role models of, wow, I can be a leader. I have influence even at a young age. What advice would you have to someone going home from a TeenPact class? Oftentimes we hear this term of, we don't want TeenPact to be a mountaintop experience. And what we mean by that is a lot of people come to TeenPact and they get really, really hype at TeenPact and they learn a lot of things, but then they go home and they kind of stay the same. Nothing really changes. So what advice would you give to someone who really is impacted by TeenPact, but then how to, that saying that knowledge without application means nothing. So how do you think we can apply what we learn at TeenPact back home in our communities, in our schools, in our work, in every area of our life?
Usually the most important thing to do if someone is aspiring to be in leadership in TeenPact is for them to go to national convention, run for an office, even if it's just a representative office, or even if it's just helping someone run for office. So you've got to get engaged at national convention, and then you need to go to another alumni class somewhere and get to know our staff, because these staff are having a lot of influence in who I'm talking about our national staff, our employees, our interns, our program directors, the folks that are staffing alumni classes. These are usually traveling interns or traveling staff with TeenPact, and you've got to get some interaction with these people for them to know enough about you in order to give you a good reference. It's really difficult to get a reference from someone that you've never had interaction with. So the best way to put yourself into proximity with these folks is to go to another TeenPact event and then apply to be a staff member at your next TeenPact class. If you don't get it, go back as an alumni and then do the same thing over again, because sometimes it does take that third year before you get selected as staff. So we want you to go through the class the first time, want you to go through as an alumni, and then that next year come back as a staffer.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of looking back past before the founding of TeenPact, was there like a moment or spark that went off for you that ignited your interest in government, whether it be locally or nationally?
Well, my grandfather was a county commissioner, and I campaigned with him, as early as 11 years old, walking around with him, knocking on doors. So I did see that in my own family, but it was that state student government experience where I ran for sophomore class president. I ran for vice president of the school. I ran for president, and these were big offices for my school. I mean, we had 2,400 people in the school, so it was a substantial body of people, so to speak, for a high school experience, and then on off to college and getting elected at the Baptist Student Union at the University of Georgia, a much smaller pool of voters and pool of people. But those experiences really helped me see that learning how to run for political office, how to get elected, and then how to do a good job once you have that position is an important stepping stone for a leader.
Yeah, I think that's great. Kind of stepping away from TeenPact for a minute. You left TeenPact as the president of TeenPact in 2010, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I left to run for political office.
Okay, and I was just wondering, what kind of influenced you in that decision the most, and what have you done since then?
I knew that I wanted to run for office one day. I remember sitting in Truett Cathy's office, the president of Chick-fil-A, when I was 21 years old, and turning down an opportunity to work for Chick-fil-A in Texas because I didn't want to leave the state, because I really believed that God wanted me to run for office one day. And so that conviction kept me in Georgia. It kept me from working for Chick-fil-A. And the timing was the only thing that was in question, and whether or not God was opening the door for me to run for an office. And I looked at many different offices through the years. I never ran for an office, but I considered it. I prayed about it. And it wasn't until 2010 that the Public Service Commission seat opened up. And after praying about it, seeking counsel from the TeenPact board and others, we decided to run for the office.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, especially because in today's culture, it's so important that we have godly Christian leaders in politics. I was wondering, kind of staying on that, what do you think, or rather, how do you think that we as Christians can be a light? Because oftentimes politics is very divisive, it's very polarized. And how do you think that we as Christians can stand up for what we believe in, stand up for the truth, but still keep our Christian witness and still do it in love?
Well, you definitely have to look at where you're at and the role that you have in whatever organization you're working for, volunteering with, or serving at the time. I mean, obviously, if you're running for political office, you're going to have some clash. Clash is required to get elected. It's a contest. It's a battle. And obviously, as a Christian, we operate, on a biblical set of ethics, and we need to comply with that and honor that. But it doesn't mean that we're not running a race, that we're not fighting a battle, that we're not articulating ideas and policies in a winsome way, and that those that are helping us, maybe our paid staff or our volunteer staff, they're doing the same thing. They're out there maybe knocking on doors for us, or maybe they're writing a press release, or going to a meeting and being a proxy speaker, which happens on my campaign all the time with teen packers that are working for me. So I think we always have to remember that, the Bible is, the guiding light for us. And as we are, as we're engaging in this battle for ideas, we want to be able to, to speak forthrightly about these. We want to speak shrewdly. We want to consider the audience that that we're speaking to. So there's so many different factors that play into exactly what you're going to do in any given moment. But your question was about being light, and being light means that that people see Christ within you, that they know that, wow, there's something different about this person. Why does this person operate the way they do? Why do they speak the way they do? Why do they do constituent service the way they do? Why do they serve the way they do? If people aren't asking that question, then maybe we're not doing it right.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such good advice. So kind of looking at today, where I believe the office you hold is the Georgia Energy Commissioner, correct?
Yes, we call it the Public Service Commission in Georgia. In other states, it's called the Public Utility Commission.
Okay, great. If you can kind of explain to me and walk me through what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, how would you explain that?
I really explain it as being like a referee, that there are companies that fight, utility companies, energy companies, telecom companies, and we are the judges or the referees that decide arguments for these companies, that approve these companies' budgets, subsidies that they may be entitled to under the law. We also have a constitutional duty in energy planning to make sure that the grid is operating efficiently, that rates are just and reasonable. So, I mean, we're really all about infrastructure, and in Georgia, this is an elected position. Most states, it's appointed by the governor. So, that element of politics is why I was interested in it. I would not have been seeking this role if it had been an appointed position.
Kind of staying on that role, I was looking at a little bit of your history, and you're the founder of the Clean Energy Roadshow. You host a podcast. So what do you kind of see as your future? Do you see yourself staying as in this commissioner role? Do you see yourself maybe one day running for a higher office or maybe doing something else? What do you kind of see as your future?
I am running for re-election next year, another 6-year term. So I guess for the next 7 years, I would see myself continuing to serve in the role of the Public Service Commission. I'm 11 years in. So at the end of another term, if God allows me to get elected, that would have been 18 years of service in this. And our state's changing, like many other red states. Our state is purple, and it may be turning blue. I am running as a Republican, so there's some question whether a Republican can get elected statewide next year in Georgia, and certainly in 7 years, there's a big question about whether that could happen. So, it may be that God would open the door for me to run for a U.S. Congress position. That would be a Republican seat where I might be able to win that seat. It may be that God opens the door for another office. But many are questioning whether I would be able to win a fourth term in 2028 if I am successful next year.
Yeah. One of the things that I've really seen in my experiences with TeenPact is a lot of times when you go to state classes or when you go to alumni events, the students there, they're really passionate about government. They're really passionate about service. And TeenPact is really good in that area of inspiring that passion. So I was wondering, especially for you as someone who has run in politics and is currently in politics, what advice you would give to someone who's gone through TeenPacts, who's inspired and wants to serve in government, in politics? What advice would you give them?
I would say don't be afraid to start small. There's a lot of cities around the country where only 300 or 400 or 500 people vote. So half of that would be making the decision about who is the mayor and council for a city. So as you leave home, go to college, and then get settled into a community, consider moving inside the city limits of wherever you're moving to. Before you sign a lease or buy a house, look at the political jurisdictions. What House seat are you in? What state Senate seat are you in? What municipal district are you in? And consider running for a city council seat. It would be probably the smallest political jurisdiction out there, the easiest to win. It's all part-time, and the meetings are usually at night, once or twice a month, so it's a very light-duty job, but it would give you some experience and a place to really try out some of your TeenPact skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking back to the idea of TeenPact as a whole, it's definitely a lot different of a ministry than when you first started it to what it is today. Kind of seeing that progression from moving from just one state class in Georgia to now being in all 50 states with having multiple alumni events all across the country. Where do you see TeenPact headed in the future as they continue to move on as a ministry?
I still serve on the board of directors for TeenPact. I have a permanent seat on the board according to our bylaws. I really like the leadership that Peter Martin and our board brings to TeenPact. I think they'll continue to strengthen the state program. That is our bread and butter event. I think we'll continue to add alumni events from time to time. I think we'll continue to see more and more TeenPackers grow up, get elected to political office, on their own skill, and serve. That's going to be very inspirational, I think, to the TeenPact Nation at large. I think we'll continue to really focus on the Lordship of Christ and and helping students see that their relationship with God comes before everything, and that politics is an important part of our culture, but it's not the most important part of our culture, that spiritual revival is really the answer to what we need in our country, not more political actors or more cable news channels or talk radio shows. We need spiritual revival. We need people coming to Christ. We need Generation Z. We need millennials, to wake up and see that without Christ, this country will not be what God intended for it to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so powerful. And I think one thing I wanted to touch on with that is, the leadership that both Mr. Martin, the entire TeenPact board, and the office brings. And my personal experience is what you said, is that, before any sort of political training, before any sort of leadership training, that Christ and your relationship with Christ should be at the forefront. And I remember a little while back you said you were sitting in the office of the Chick-fil-A CEO, and they offered you a position, but you said no because you felt like the Lord was calling you elsewhere. And I was wondering, what advice would you give to someone who, really may want to do something, but really feels like the Lord is calling them elsewhere? Or maybe to simplify the question, how do you think that we can truly follow the Lord's call on our lives, whether that's politics or whether that may be a different field?
Well, God's call, is the most important thing, because even though logically it might not make sense at the time, it is in the end the best course of action. So it's just a matter of, how do you find God's will? By reading His Word, by walking with Him on a daily basis, by being obedient to the Holy Spirit in your life, by getting wise counsel on a regular basis, by being a teachable person. All of those things are important to finding God's will. And so as you walk with Him, opportunities will come available. Then you have to have the courage to be able to step out and do what He's asking you to do. But I've had 2 people within just the last few weeks call me and say, hey, I'm thinking about running for office. What do you think? And as I asked them a series of questions, it was clear that, that they were being obedient to God. In one case, God closed the door because this person thought they lived in a certain district and they didn't. So the door was closed because of redistricting. And then on the second person, they are running for that office. So we'll see, what becomes of that. But they are, of course, being obedient to God, and God honors obedience.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. Kind of to wrap up, if you had to give someone who went through TeenPact, who is now out of TeenPact, or someone who's even still in TeenPact, or someone even at the beginning who's considering TeenPact, what piece of advice or maybe what kind of idea would you leave us?
I think being obedient to God is the most important thing. And I mean, we love the fact that students come to TeenPact and we have an opportunity to speak into their life, maybe 1 season, maybe 5 seasons, maybe 10 seasons. But God then moves them on and gives someone else a responsibility to nurture and shepherd them. So I would say that, TeenPact is a beginning place for a lot of people, and it's far more than just a trip to the Capitol or a civics lesson. It's really a chance to trust God and do something maybe that's out of your comfort zone. And as you do that, God will honor that, and He'll show you the next door to go through.
Yep, that's such good advice. So that is going to be all the time we have for today. Thank you, Mr. Echols, for coming on. It's been such a pleasure to have you, and really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Great to be with you guys today.
All right, thank you. Stay tuned for the TeenPact podcast coming out weekly. Thank you. See you guys next time.